Hello and welcome everybody to today's episode of the JBA All In Podcast. The JBA All In Podcast is your one-stop sports shop podcast for news around the sports world. Today we have a shorter episode just talking about Carson Wentz. My name is Jack.
My name is Brendan.
And, like we said, we're going to be talking about the Carson Wentz trade. We're a little bit late here, but we're going to do a quick but in-depth review. So starting it off, So the Carson Wentz was traded to the Indianapolis Colts from the Philadelphia Eagles. The Colts received Carson Wentz, and the Eagles received a 2021 third and a 2022 conditional second rounder, which can turn into a first rounder if he plays 75%, or I think it's 70% of the snaps, and make the playoffs, or just 75% of the snaps. So if Wentz doesn't have an injury, it's basically a guaranteed first rounder. Brennan, you're a Colts fan. What do you think about this? I personally think it's a good trade for the Colts. I think the Eagles gave up a little bit. The Eagles didn't. I mean, I'll just say this. I think the Colts won the trade. What do you think?
This is like a trade right now that I think is very neutral. I think we have to wait and see how, I think it's hard to analyze it right now because I have no clue what Wentz is going to be like next year. If Wentz plays like 2020 Wentz, the Eagles for sure win. They unload his contract, they get picks, and and if Wentz does like suck, the Colts could end up starting Eason. They'll that second round pick, conditional second round pick in 2022 might not be a first round pick, but regardless, they still at least get 2 day 2 picks and possibly 1 day 2 and 1 day 1 pick for the Eagles, and also unload his contract. So if Wentz is like 2020 Wentz, then the Eagles win the trade. But if Wentz is anything besides that, if he plays like he did, or especially if he plays like he did in 2017 where he was an MVP candidate, just anything in years 2 to 5 where 2 to 4 where year 2 was the year where he was an MVP candidate. He played amazing in 2015. That'd make the Colts probably one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the league if Carson Wentz played like he did in 2017. I don't think he'll play like that because he did have an injury which ended the season. Then I think it's hard to and he hasn't been the same since then. He hasn't been bad since then. He's had one bad season the past year, which you could blame on the lack of weapons. His primary targets were Greg Ward, Travis Fulgham. Zach Ertz is injured for a lot of the season. Dallas Goedert missed a good amount of games. So really, in terms of his wideouts, he had no one to throw to, and he also had a good amount of injuries in 2019 on his roster, and he still had a good season that year. Had over 4,000 yards. He had 27 touchdown passes and 7 interceptions that year with lots of injuries on that roster. But the O-line was a little better that year than it was this year. It wasn't as injured. And you can make the argument the defense was better, but something happened this year where you can't really point to anything on the roster. Like, yeah, there's more injuries on the roster this year. Yeah, the defense probably a little bit worse. Yeah, you could say maybe the coaching was worse, like because Wentz and Doug Pearson reportedly didn't talk for 8 straight weeks or something like that during the season. But regardless, there's not one reason. Like it's not like, for example, with Deshaun Watson, like Deshaun Watson didn't have a bad year, but the Texans did. And so for Deshaun Watson, the Texans, you can point to why they dropped off so much. Well, they traded away their best receiver in DeAndre Hopkins. Their defense got tremendously worse and that stuff, and you could see why. But it was really like, yeah, there's a little bit more injuries. Yeah, maybe the defense is a little bit worse, stuff like that. There's not one like big thing that as soon as it happened, like for example, DeAndre Hopkins trade, who already knew the Texans that wasn't good for them. Like they knew they get worse. But with this, it's like, yeah, maybe Deshaun Jackson goes out or something like that. It's like, yeah, they can still manage it. Like it was really weird. I think just once he had an off season, which maybe that's his new reality. Maybe that's the new reality of him as a quarterback. Maybe that's how he is from now on. If that's the case, that's bad for my Colts. But he's had, besides that season, and his rookie season wasn't the best as well. He has had 5 total seasons. That he's going to a 6. His rookie season wasn't the best. He wasn't, it wasn't the best, but it wasn't as bad as last season. This most recent season he had 57.4 completion percentage, 2,620 yards passing, 16 touchdowns, 15 picks, and he was sacked 50 times, pointing to that poor O-line play. In 2016, he had somewhat similar stats. He played 16 games as opposed to his 12 this season, so he had more yards naturally, but his completion percentage was a little bit better by exactly 5%. He had the same amount of touchdowns, and he had one less interception. He had 16 touchdowns to 14 interceptions. So he had a great season in 2016, but it was better in 2020. But those his three middle seasons in 2017, 2018, 2019, where in 2017 we know he did there, and then even in 2018, 2019. Where, like I said, in 2019 he had a good season that year. In 2018 he had a good season there as well. He was injured for a lot of it. He only played 11 games, but he still had over 3,000 yards passing, 21 touchdowns, only 7 interceptions. And also we see a big decline in his QBR. He has 78.5 QBR in 2017, 62 in 2018, 62.8 in 2019, and 49.6 in 2020. Same with his passer rating, 101.9 in 2017, 102.2 in 2018, 93.1 in 2019, 72.8 in 2020. Maybe it's the O-line play, but there's also, Carson Wentz from a clean pocket, PFF stat here, which the definition of a clean pocket is probably a loose term, but you understand what I'm saying here. He still threw 10 picks, which is most in the league from a clean pocket. He was still downright bad from this concept of a quote clean pocket. But he definitely felt the pressure a lot more this most recent season. I think with the Colts, you have one of the best lines in the league. That'll definitely help. He has a great running game now, something that he hasn't had often in Philly. Miles Sanders is good, but a big strength of his is also his receiving prowess. And the running game this year for the Eagles wasn't great. It had some good games. They had some good games where the running game got going, but overall, it wasn't really enough, I think, to support, a quarterback if you want to be, it's really hard to support a struggling quarterback if you don't have a good running game. But the Colts, you got the elite O-line. You got the young running back Jonathan Taylor running behind that O-line. It really came on last season, at the end of the season. You also have a great defense with lots of young defensive players. You have a team that's great with special teams as well. The Colts sent 2 special teamers to the All-Pro team, one first-team All-Pro special teamer George Odom, second-team All-Pro long snapper and Luke Rhodes. And then also the weapons. The Colts weapons are great. You got Nyheim Hines as a receiving back. You have Ty who could be gone after he could leave in free agency. Zach Pascal who could leave in free agency, but the Colts have already mentioned that they plan on signing him. It's all about done. It's all about guaranteed Zach Pascal coming back, but there's still a chance, an outside chance. You never know. If until March 17th, nothing is official in terms of like trades and free agency and all that stuff. And you got Pittman, who shows a lot of potential, especially being one of the top receivers in run after catch last season, while having nearly 100 less receptions with everyone around him. I believe he was in the 5th or 6th best receiver with the yards after catch while having 100 less receptions or so. Or no, sorry, not 100 less receptions, but a good amount less receptions than the receivers above him on that list and below him as well. He shows a lot of potential as a number one option. I think he'd be solid, maybe not great, but he definitely, if he didn't really have the opportunity to show off, his deep route running, his deep catching, his ability to get downfield vertically with Phil Rivers like he did. He didn't have the opportunity to show what he can do. We saw in USC, we didn't have opportunity. We weren't able to see it in the NFL in his rookie year with Philip Rivers. Carson Wentz could add a little bit to that with his much stronger arm. Also, Carson Wentz has a little more mobility than Rivers. His decision making, while Philip Rivers gets knocked for decision making, he still has a very high football IQ. And last season he did play really well. He was pretty safe with the ball. He had some early mishaps, but besides the first few games, he really didn't throw many picks in the season at all. And Carson Wentz's decision making is just as bad as Philip Rivers, if not worse. But this also opens up the playbook a little more with, like I said, with the vertical passing game, deeper passing, also RPOs, stuff like that. Stuff that Philip Rivers really wasn't able to do that much on the Colts last season. Made rolling out of the designed rollouts out of the pocket, play action rollouts, that stuff. I think if Wentz just goes, if Wentz, also, I haven't even mentioned this yet. This is one of the biggest talking points of why Wentz could win this trade for the Colts is that he's reconnecting with Frank Reich, his offensive coordinator from 2017, who left to get coach the Colts in 2018, and then we've seen Wentz declining since then. I don't think. Look, I'm not saying that Wentz is going to go back to 2017 form, but I do believe that in the circumstances around him, that it's not. It's really hard to guess, but right now I want to be optimistic and I want to say that I think that he can go back to maybe what he was in like 2018 and 2019. And even just that, I think just a 2018 Wentz or 2019 Wentz, he was a really good quarterback then. He, like I said, in 2019, he had a great season over 4,000 yards passing, 27 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. That's great. In 2018, he had his career high in QB rating, even higher than he did in 2017, which might be hard to believe with, his career high in TD percentage by a lot in 2017. More yards in 2017, more touchdowns by 12. So it's hard to believe, but he had a better passer rating in 2018 to 2017. So even just like that kind of wins. I wouldn't say he's better in 2018 though. He wasn't better in 2018, but you get what I'm saying. He was still really good in those 2 years there, and it's definitely realistic to see him performing somewhat close to that in that range. But it's also don't be surprised if he plays like 2020 wins, because he could be unfixable. But I want to, as a Colts fan, I hope that he's fixable. I think that he is fixable, and I think that there's a good chance that he could play like he did 2 to 3 years ago. And if he does that, I think the Colts are contenders. If he doesn't, it's going to be a long season. It's going to be another year where they either barely miss the playoffs or barely make it in and then get knocked out in the first round. That's my thoughts on the Colts side of the trade. Jack, you want to talk about the Eagles side of the trade?
Now, before I talk about the Eagles side of the trade, I wanted to mention one thing that's wrong with Carson Wentz. If you look at his mechanics, there's some stuff that, like, I'm not a quarterback, right? But there's some stuff that's noticeably wrong. I mean, his foot placement, where he's throwing, he's got to work on that. And I think Frank Reich, like you said, coming back with his old offensive coordinator, he could fix those things. But the quarterback is a very mechanically driven position. Sure, you could be a gifted athlete and you can't succeed, but you got to have decent mechanics, right? But his foot placement, I mean, when you're throwing, you want to point your feet where you're throwing. His feet are going everywhere. His arms going everywhere. He's got to work on his mechanics. He's got to get them back to where they were, right? Because Carson Wentz, he's got the physicals, but he's also got to work on those mechanics, because that's a reason why he's throwing so many picks, right? And now that he has an elite O-line, he's back with Frank Reich. He's got receivers that can catch the ball a lot better. He's got a better defense. He's in a better situation. He's on a Super Bowl team if they have a quarterback. If he plays like this season, Carson Wentz, I don't want to say this too early, but the Colts might be losing their shot at a title. I mean, you didn't go all in with Wentz, but I think if Wentz doesn't pan out this season, you got to go all in with somebody, and you really got to stick it, because you want to start at least getting that winning culture right now. I mean, sure, you're making the playoffs, but you're not going to lose your title chances that quickly. But right now, I think you're in a prime position to make a long run. And if Wentz can play like the old Carson Wentz that we saw, he's going to be great. And now I'm going to talk about the Eagles side. I'm going to keep it a little short. I think the Eagles could have gotten more for Carson Wentz. I mean, it's basically a first and a third, and that's good, right? And that opens up Jalen Hurts for the starting spot. But it really depends on how Wentz pans out. If he plays like old Wentz, then they definitely got fleeced. But if he plays like Wentz from this season, the Colts definitely got fleeced in this trade. And I mean, I think it's good for both sides. But with that second conditional rounder most likely being a first, I think this is pretty solid. I mean, the Colts are going to be good. So don't get me wrong. The picks aren't going to be great, but, I feel like they could have gotten a little bit more for Carson Wentz. But this is, they're obviously building for the future. You're probably going to draft a better receiver with, I think they have the 6th pick. Don't quote me on that. You got Jalen Hurts, who he didn't play a lot of games, but in my opinion, he was a second or third best rookie quarterback, behind Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow. I mean, if you think about how great this draft class was, you had 2 players that had the best seasons of all time at their positions. You got Justin Herbert, had the best rookie quarterback season of all time. You had Justin Jefferson. Both of them, if You took one and put them in another draft class. Both of them would easily win Offensive Rookie of the Year. I mean, they're both going to be amazing. And you got Joe Burrow. I mean, Joe Burrow wasn't as good as Justin Herbert, but he wasn't bad at all. He was a good quarterback. And, Jalen Hurts came in. He played a few good games until obviously they took him out to tank. Doug Peterson gets fired for that one. And then, Tua didn't pan out, but he's got all the potential. This is such a good draft. And you got a good quarterback in Jalen Hurts. And, I mean, now if you can replicate that success, like somewhat replicate that success and get a good receiver, get a good weapon, because that's the main problem with them right now. Nick Sirianni's got to work on that, I mean, we don't know if he's the right coach for the job. That first press conference didn't go well, but, I mean, press conferences don't show anything. They don't really show much. So we're going to have to see. They got a few good picks out of this. If they start getting more picks, they're going to become the Thunder of the NFL, really. So I think this is good for both sides. I think Wentz is going to pan out. I don't think he's going to be MVP level Wentz, but I think it's going to be a solid quarterback. I think they're going to get success, and I think the Eagles are setting themselves up for the future. I don't think they have the brightest future by any means, but, this gets them a few picks, second and third guaranteed, maybe even a first, most likely. So I think this is good. And if they can get a good weapon this year in the draft and then get a few other good weapons in the next coming drafts with the Colts picks, I think that can be great.
All right, I agree. I agree with that take. I think I want to say one more thing before I think the Eagles. Sorry, the Eagles are banking on the fact that Wentz doesn't pan out for the Colts, which is probably a bad sign for the Colts. No team would know Wentz better than the Eagles. You would think, right? So, but at the same time, the Eagles aren't necessarily known for their ability to evaluate talent. I mean. They've had some notoriously bad draft picks the last couple of years. They've had some bad free agent signs. Their front office isn't the greatest at that, but still, they would know the Wentz better than anyone, regardless. So I think that could be a bad sign for the Colts that they would let him get off for so little. But at the same time, they wanted more. They felt he was worth more. So. Or you would assume that they would think that he's worth more, or maybe maybe it's all a trick and they just want everyone else to think that they think he's worth more. But it could either be that they're just putting on a false kind of like mask of like, oh yeah, actually we still think he has the potential to blah 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 blah. He should be worth this and that. But it could also be the thing of like they actually do think that, and then they just did not have the options to get that. It was really this was the best offer. Apparently, there was barely any interest in Wentz prior. I mean, that goes against what was being said during negotiations, but after this came out, apparently, the Bears weren't really as in it as people thought. It was really mainly the Colts, and really they made that offer and they just kind of like stuck there, and really no one would outbid that offer, and the Colts weren't also about to outbid themselves. So that's pretty much what happened, according to what started to come out post negotiations. So thank you for watching today's episode of the JBA All In Podcast. Carson Wentz to the Colts, big story. We'll continue to have more as the offseason goes along. And we will see you in our next episode. Make sure you support if you enjoyed it. Bye-bye.